Good morning, friends. I want to continue our study in biblical prophecy in Revelation chapter 11. But as I began studying through these chapters, the thought occurred to me that maybe it might be a good idea for the people to know who I am before I start going off into a tangent and dealing with all these controversial matters. You need to know something about me, I think. So I want to talk to you about my experience in teaching and studying biblical prophecy. Now, I don't know anyone who has studied biblical prophecy longer than I have, unless it was Oswald J. Smith. He was 96, I think, when he passed away. He was the founder of the People's Church in Canada, and he wrote a lot of books on biblical prophecy, most of them of which I read. And he has had a great influence on my understanding of these prophetical books and arousing interest in my own mind. But when I got out of the service, I was anxious. I wanted to study the Bible. So I went to a Christian college thinking that I would get my Bible training there. But then I found out they only had two Bible courses they offered. And I had to take a few other classes before I could qualify to take them. So I took one in the Old Testament. And later on, the professor that taught the class went home one night, beat up his wife, and committed suicide. And the same teacher was practicing hypnotism on some of the students. So I had a lot of questions about my Bible teachers then, and about who was teaching the Bible at this college. But while I was at college, I heard about Prairie Bible Institute, and as through information I received then and through the books I read, I became acquainted with that school. Eventually, I went there and graduated, and a lot of the questions I had about the Bible were removed as I learned how to study the Bible inductively by attending Prairie. Now, while I was in college, this was in 1960, so that was 65 years ago. While I was in college, I began to take advantage of the local bookstore and purchase books on studying the Bible, since I had to wait so long to go get any for school. So I started doing my own study and began to buy a lot of books, mostly on biblical prophecy. I read books by Harry Ironside, M.R. DeHaan, W.A. Criswell. But the man who had the greatest effect on me was Dr. Oswald J. Smith. Now, he was still alive at the time. I purchased all of his books because I enjoyed reading them. I never heard him speak, but I liked what he wrote. And he always said to us, now, it's very important before you study the Bible that you purchase a Scofield Reference Bible. He insisted on that. And he also talked about the rapture of the church and the book of Revelation and Daniel, and given his ideas on that. And so Oswald J. Smith probably had the greatest influence on my studying biblical prophecy. Now, over the years, questions arose in my mind, especially when I got to Revelation chapter 4, verse 1. The book started telling me, M.R. DeHaan first said this in my reading, in my understanding. He says that chapter 4:1 talks about the rapture of the church. Now, friends, I couldn't figure that out. I mean, I just finished reading Revelations 1, 2, and 3, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me how Revelation 4:1 had anything to do with what was just taught. in the scriptures. So I always had a question in my mind about this teaching. So I consulted the experts, all the books, the other books I had that I trusted, and they all said the same thing. So, well, something's wrong here. Either I'm confused in my way of thinking, or maybe there's another way of seeing things. So I kind of left that and just kind of trusted my Bible studies as I went along to clear up any doubts I may have had. And it wasn't until I turned 65 when I first started writing my book on Revelation. And I wrote my book on Revelation because I wanted to write something that wasn't filled with all these dispensational, pre-trib, etc., all these ideas. I said, well, if somebody wrote a book that was impartial from all that, it might be nice. So I thought maybe I would be the person to do that, not realizing what lay before me. Well, I finally had my books on the Pope commentary. It was the only one I had. So I started Revelation using the only commentary I had. And when I finished my book, I had it published with 2 different publishers. And I didn't realize at the time that there were 2 chapters in that book that I was writing with lack of understanding. And so I had to change that eventually. But it's interesting. The man who most influenced me to buy my Scofield Bible and understand the pre-tribulation rapture was Oswald J. Smith. And later on, after he wrote all these books, he wrote an article called Tribulation or Rapture, Which? And that little booklet is available. You can look for Oswald J. Smith. And in this message, he rejected everything he taught about the pre-tribulation rapture that he taught before. He talked about where he got his influence from and who influenced his mind, and how he was challenged to rethink his position. And later on in his life, he had to get up in front of his church, in front of his people, and tell them, all these years I've been teaching people something that was entirely false, because certain people influenced my thinking along these lines. So Oswald J. Smith, the man who was most influential in me beginning my study in Revelation, came to the conclusion that what he taught me was wrong. And I liked that. And it kind of freed me up to do some studies on my own. Now, when I finished writing my book on Revelation, I called it The Reward of Faithfulness. I thought that was a good title. And I still have, it's my first book on Revelation. I've written it 3 times. The second time was called the second edition, and I had to change my publishers because I couldn't afford to buy my books from them. So it was necessary for me to change my publisher. But when I wrote my 3rd edition, that was the final book on that particular subject, and it was due to something that happened to me after I wrote Revelation. I said, I'm going to try Daniel. So I got a hold of Mr. Rendell, our teacher at Prairie, and asked him, what's the best book on prophecy on Daniel to study? And he says, by all means, The History and Prophecies of Daniel by G.H. Lang. Now, G.H. Lang wrote several books that were very good, and he preached during the times that the pre-tribulation rapture was just beginning to gel. The dispensational idea had not yet fully been developed at the time he was preaching and teaching. But he was teaching a lot of books on prophecy and the rapture wasn't in any of his books. So I purchased his book on Daniel, and I liked it so well, I purchased his book on Revelation. And when I read his book on Revelation, it completely blew my mind, because I realized in chapter 4 and in chapter 12, I had totally misunderstood the meaning of those two chapters. So I had to go back and reread the book, his book, and reread what I had written down. And so I eventually put together my second edition on Revelation, making the necessary changes. So that book is still available as The Reward of Faithfulness. But I wrote another book on Revelation and it was based on what I did in Daniel. When I wrote my book in Daniel, I made them teaching devotionals. I thought it'd be a nice way to present prophecy. So I did that in Daniel. So I decided to make one on Revelation as well. So I called that In the Spirit on the Lord's Day, and they were devotional teachings on Revelation. So now I had two different volumes on Revelation. Later on, I wrote a book on the seven churches called Unprepared for the Wedding. And I made that an inductive study on the seven churches, and putting questions for review and discussion in that chapter. And so I've written a third edition on Revelation pertaining to the seven churches, called Unprepared for the Wedding. So those books are now available as well, as I printed them. So later on, as I began to do all these things, it came to mind that maybe I should put together a more perfect book on Revelation, tie up the loose ends, and try to present an expository teaching on the book. So I wrote an exposition on Revelation, and I entitled it Tying Up the Loose Ends. So I thought I did a pretty good job answering all the questions and dealing with all the problems that I may have missed prior. So what had happened, I started putting these messages in my different groups, and I would put them as audios as well. And so people could listen to them instead of having to read them. So I put them as audios using different voices. So one of the men in my church came to me one day and said, "Henry, I think we'd rather hear you talking rather than using these artificial voices." Well, he didn't know that I've been having a hard time speaking. I can't preach with notes anymore. And I'm not confident speaking extemporaneously because I've never done it before. So when he said that to me, he was telling me that he enjoyed listening to me speak. Well, that was nice. No one else ever told me that before. So I thought, well, maybe I can do it. So here we are. In the past year, since Randy challenged me to begin speaking extemporaneously, I have put together over 130 messages on Zoom and YouTube using the extemporaneous method of teaching. And friends, I'm getting really comfortable with that. And I'm really enjoying it. And I'm challenged to continue studying using this method. Recently, I was contacted by some men who read one of my chapters on Revelation that I put into another group. And he asked me if I did discipleship ministries. Well, it just so happened that was something that I had given up on. It's something I wanted to do, but I gave up because I could never get anybody to attend the school I wanted to start. So now I have 14 people. Most of them were pastors and evangelists. I had 20, but I I dropped that group for a reason. But now I restarted a group on discipleship, and up to now I have 14 people in my group that I'm ministering, and they are all men who are in the ministry. They have more churches. They preach to more people than I ever did in my life. And they asked me to be their servant and conduct this discipleship ministry. And friends, that had to be of the Lord, because I didn't go looking for it. In fact, when the invitation came to me, I was ready to give up the whole idea. And now I'm going great guns. I'm speaking almost every day to this group of men. So it shows you what happens and what the Lord can do even in your old age. It's like I'm learning how to preach all over again. And friends, I think I'm getting better. Now, that's my opinion. I know I'm getting more comfortable and more confident. So, and as I listened to the message, I said, well, they're not too bad. And I'm actually preaching better than I did when I was younger and had notes. So, what do you say to all of that? Well, tomorrow I'm going to start teaching on Revelation chapter 11. But I wanted to give you some background of why I started studying biblical prophecy and how many years I spent studying this. I read all the books, friends. If there's any books on any of the subjects, pro and con, or what do you want to call them, I've read them all the ones that were popular and were helped me to understand. So I'm not coming to this study without having years of experience of the story of studying and exploring and making changes in my own thinking along the way. So I wanted you to have this. I wanted you to know this because a lot of people think I'm going off half-cocked by teaching Revelation when I'm not doing what the schools are doing. I read all of people ask me, have you read Schaeffer's book on the Millennial Kingdom? Yes, I read that. Have you read the Scofield Bible? Yes, I read that. Have you read Dwight Pentecost's book on things to come? Yes, I read that book. How about Walver's book on the rapture question? Yes, I read that. I read Gundry's book, and I read a whole bunch of other ones, Gundry and the Blessed Hope, Eldon Ladd's book. I read all the one of the books that I think was really good was called The Approaching Advent of Christ, which was written the year I was born by a man by the name of Alexander Reese. And that book was the most enlightening of any book I ever read on the subject of post-tribulationism. So I have not approached these subjects without careful study. And now I'm able to teach them with confidence because I understand the problems of the book and the problems with interpretation. So with that, I'll close, and hopefully I will have not taken too much time. And tomorrow I'll start studying Revelation chapter 11. We'll see you later.